And the way he lives today is a world away from the powerhouse we saw in the ring. Once feared as the Russian nightmare, he dominated wrestling during the Cold War. But behind the muscles and menace was a man heading toward a very different ending than anyone imagined. Picture this, a mountain of muscle with a shaven head and icy stare, arms folded across his massive chest, never speaking a word of English. To American audiences in the 1980s, Nikita Koloff was the living embodiment of their Soviet fears. He stood silent and unbeatable, a machine built for destruction. What they didn't know was that this terrifying Russian was actually Nelson Scott Simpson from Minneapolis, Minnesota. The whole thing was an act, but it was an act that would define his life, trap him in controversy, and ultimately leave him far from the spotlight he once commanded. The birth of the Russian nightmare started with broken dreams. Nelson Simpson had big plans. He wanted to play football in the USFL. But injuries crushed those hopes at Minnesota State University Moorhead. When his friend Road Warrior Animal called with a wrestling opportunity, Simpson was desperate enough to try anything. Jim Crockett Jr. saw potential in the athletic newcomer and created a character that would change everything. Simpson became Nikita Koloff, the supposed nephew of veteran wrestler, Russian Bear, Ivan Koloff. He was paired with turncoat American Don Kernodle. The plan was simple but extreme. Koloff would be a silent, menacing enforcer who never spoke English. What happened next was dedication that bordered on obsession. For 13 straight months, Simpson refused to speak English in public. He learned basic Russian from audio tapes. He stayed in character 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. He even came to hate his real name, Nelson, and would go to great lengths to make sure nobody called him that. This wasn't just method acting. It was a complete erasure of his identity. While other wrestlers went home and lived normal lives, Simpson was trapped inside a character he had created. The timing couldn't have been better for a Russian villain. Ronald Reagan had called the Soviet Union an evil empire. Americans feared nuclear war and communist invasion. Cold War tensions were at their highest in decades. Wrestling fans didn't see Nikita Koloff as entertainment. They saw him as a genuine threat to everything they held dear. Other wrestling villains of the era were cartoon characters. The Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov would wave foreign flags and sing national anthems while crowds booed. It was theatrical and almost silly. But Koloff was different. He felt real. He felt dangerous. His silence made him more terrifying than any speech could. Fans genuinely believed he was a Soviet agent sent to destroy American wrestling. The character worked because it fed on real geopolitical fear, but it also meant Koloff was profiting from the very tensions that could have led to nuclear war. The peak of Koloff's villainous career came through his rivalry with Magnum TA, the all-American hero. Booker Dusty Rhodes crafted a perfect USA versus Russia storyline. The feud built slowly through passionate promos and limited fights. The turning point came during a contract signing when Koloff insulted Magnum's mother. The American hero lost his temper, attacked NWA President Bob Geigel, and was stripped of his United States Championship. What followed was the legendary Best of 7 series. Koloff dominated early, winning the first 3 matches and looking unstoppable. Magnum fought back desperately, winning the next 3 to tie the series at 3-3. The final match in Charlotte, North Carolina, saw Koloff cheat to win the title. Both men sustained real injuries during their brutal encounters. Koloff cut a vein in his forehead. Magnum had trouble breathing after kidney shots. The violence was authentic, and so was the pain. But real life has a way of destroying the best storylines. In October 1986, Magnum TA was involved in a horrific car crash that ended his career and left him paralyzed. The man who was supposed to be Koloff's greatest rival would never wrestle again. The accident forced wrestling to confront something it rarely dealt with: actual tragedy. Dusty Rhodes made an unprecedented decision. He turned the hated Nikita Koloff into a good guy overnight. The storyline explained that after their brutal series, Koloff had developed respect for his American rival. The Russian nightmare became a super patriot, teaming with Rhodes to battle the Four Horsemen. It was emotionally powerful, but it was also a desperate attempt to salvage something from disaster. During his peak years, Koloff accumulated impressive championships. He won the NWA World Six-Man Tag Team Championship multiple times. He captured the NWA World Tag Team Championship twice with Ivan Koloff. His biggest single success came with the NWA United States Heavyweight Championship, won through his feud with Magnum TA. He also held the NWA World Television Championship and the UWF World Television Championship. In 1987, the year of his face turn, Pro Wrestling Illustrated named him Inspirational Wrestler of the Year. But even at his peak, controversy followed him. The 1980s were the height of wrestling's bodybuilding phase, when wrestlers were expected to have impossibly large physiques. Koloff has admitted to using anabolic steroids during the early part of his career. His decision to stop using them led to noticeable muscle mass loss and slower in-ring work. Fans could see the difference. The man who had been built up as an unstoppable force was clearly diminished. Koloff's steroid admission wasn't unique. Hulk Hogan admitted to using steroids since 1976. The entire industry was built on enhanced physiques and artificial strength. But for Koloff, whose character depended on appearing superhuman, the loss of muscle mass was particularly damaging. The Russian Nightmare was supposed to be a machine, not a man who needed drugs to maintain his image. His wrestling career ended not with glory, but with injury. In 1992, Koloff sustained a herniated disc in his neck that forced his retirement. The man who had once seemed indestructible was broken down by the physical demands of his profession. He was only 33 years old, but his body couldn't take anymore. What happened next surprised everyone. In October 1993, 11 months after leaving wrestling, Koloff experienced what he called a spiritual awakening. He surrendered his life to Jesus and became a born-again Christian. The transformation was as dramatic as his original character creation, but in reverse. Instead of hiding his American identity, he now embraced it. Instead of embodying evil, he preached redemption. Koloff founded Koloff for Christ Ministries in 2002. He began traveling the world as a Christian minister and motivational speaker. He has visited over 100 churches in all 50 states and dozens of countries. His ministry focuses on reaching men with a message of true biblical manhood. He has written 3 books about his journey: Breaking the Chains, Wrestling with Success, and Nikita, A Tale of the Ring and Redemption. The man who once generated intense hatred from wrestling crowds now speaks to small church gatherings. He leverages his wrestling fame as an outreach tool, sometimes hosting wrestling events to draw crowds before sharing his message of faith. It's a complete reversal of everything he once represented, but it's also a life far removed from mainstream recognition or financial success. Today at 65, Nikita Koloff lives modestly in North Carolina. The physique that once struck fear into hearts is long gone. The mystique that made him special has been replaced by earnest religious conviction. He's found personal peace and spiritual fulfillment, but it's a quiet existence compared to his days as wrestling's most hated villain. The Russian Nightmare was never real. It was a character built on lies, enhanced by steroids, and sustained by exploiting real-world fears. The man behind the character, Nelson Scott Simpson, spent years hiding his identity so completely that he seemed to lose himself. When injuries forced him out of wrestling, he had to rebuild not just his body, but his entire sense of who he was. In the end, Nikita Koloff's story is one of transformation and redemption, but it's also a reminder of how wrestling's greatest characters are often built on deception. The fans who once feared the Russian Nightmare were responding to a carefully constructed illusion. The real man underneath was always just Nelson from Minnesota, trying to find his place in the world. The contrast between what Nikita Koloff represented and how he lives today couldn't be starker. From Cold War villain to Christian minister, from sold-out arenas to small church halls, from mainstream fame to quiet obscurity. He found his true identity, but lost the larger-than-life persona that made him special. At 65, he's at peace with his choices, even if they led him far from the spotlight where legends are supposed to live.